What does it sound like when everything you've trained for collapses into a single radio transmission? Check fire, blue on blue. I repeat, blue on blue. The screech tore through the static, layering over the erratic rhythm of heavy machine gun fire pounding adobe walls 700 meters below. Dust hung in the stagnant air like a curtain between life and death, tasting of copper and pulverized concrete. Through the chaos, voices cracked with panic. "Command, this is Viper 1. We are pinned, we can't move." But high above it all, perched on a jagged ridge where the wind carved patterns into ancient stone, the world was silent. Through the scope of a Barrett MRAD, violence became geometry. Heat waves danced off the valley floor, distorting reality into something almost beautiful, almost peaceful. "Viper 1, this is Watchtower." A female voice cut through the panic, calm, almost bored, the kind of voice that didn't belong in war, or maybe the kind that belonged there more than any other. "I have the solution. Take the shot, Watchtower, drop him." "Negative. Solution requires a 10-second hold. You need to break cover." "Are you insane?" The SEAL commander's voice cracked, losing its polished edge, revealing something raw underneath. Fear. "If we break cover, we're dead in 3 seconds. If you stay, you're dead in 5. Trust the math, Commander." "Vance, don't do this." "Mark 3, 2, 1. She didn't wait for his order. Her finger curled around the trigger. The recoil punched her shoulder with a dull, familiar thud that signaled the end of a life, and perhaps the end of her career. Then nothing, static, transmission breaks. But to understand what happened on that ridge, you have to go back, 48 hours earlier, to a place where judgment arrived before she even unpacked her rifle. The mess hall at Forward Operating Base Dust Bowl smelled of stale grease, pine sol, and the aggressive musk of men who had spent too long in the sun. The air conditioning unit rattled in the corner like a dying mechanical beast, doing little to combat the Iraqi desert heat seeping through reinforced walls. Staff Sergeant Ara Vance stood at the threshold, her duffel bag resting by her boot. She didn't look like a killer. At 5'5", with hair pulled back into a severe regulation bun and a uniform that looked slightly too new, she looked like an accountant who had taken a wrong turn at Albuquerque. She scanned the room, tables of men, biceps thick as tree trunks, tattoos snaking up necks, laughter that sounded like barking. Tier 1 operators, SEALs, the elite. And they went silent the moment they saw her. "Lost, sweetheart." The voice cut through the quiet like a blade. Vance shifted her gaze. The speaker was leaning back in a plastic chair, boots up on the table, Lieutenant Commander Dagger Graves. His reputation preceded him like a shadow. 12 confirmed kills in the last tour, a bronze star, and an ego that required its own zip code. "Staff Sergeant Vance," she said, her voice flat, lacking the tremor they expected. "Reporting for integration with Task Force 7. Graves exchanged a look with the man beside him, a bearded giant sharpening a combat knife with a rhythmic scrape that set teeth on edge. "Task Force 7 is a kinetic unit, Sergeant. We break things. We don't need someone to, what is it you do? Fix the Wi-Fi." Laughter rippled through the room. It was performative, designed to assert dominance, to put her in her place before she even found it. Vance didn't blink. She walked past them, the heavy polymer case in her right hand bumping against her leg. It was a Pelican 1750, long enough to house a Soul Stealer. She set it down on an empty table, the thud heavy enough to rattle the silverware. "I'm the new Overwatch asset," Vance said, unbuckling the latches. Click, click, click. The sound was precise, mechanical. She opened the case. Inside lay a Barrett MRAD disassembled. The FDE finish was worn in places that indicated use, not storage. The scope was a Nightforce ATACR, the glass dark and unblinking. It wasn't a mindless assault weapon. It was a surgeon's scalpel forged in steel. Graves stopped smiling. He dropped his boots to the floor and stood up, walking over slowly. He looked at the rifle, then at her hands. No calluses on the knuckles from brawling, just long, steady fingers. A .338 Lapua, Graves noted, his tone shifting from mockery to skepticism. That's a lot of gun for a little girl. You qualify with that, or did you just win it in a raffle? I don't qualify, Commander, Vance said, picking up the bolt carrier group and inspecting it with a jeweler's eye. She wiped a speck of invisible dust from the firing pin. I calibrate. Calibrate? Graves repeated the word like he was tasting sour milk. We heard about you, the transfer from Intel, the simulation specialist. You've got more hours in a VR headset than you do in the dirt. Is that right? Simulation is the purest form of tactical analysis, Vance replied, sliding the bolt into the receiver with a fluid metallic clack. No fog of war, just variables, wind, distance, Coriolis, spin drift. You can't charm a bullet, sir. You have to solve it. The giant with the knife snorted. Variables don't shoot back, Barbie. When the enemy starts tossing PKM rounds at your head, your math goes out the window. Vance finally looked Graves in the eye. Her irises were a pale, unsettling gray, the color of winter fog. My math is the only thing that will keep your head on your shoulders when you breach a door, Commander. I suggest you get used to it. Graves leaned in close, invading her personal space. He smelled of tobacco and aggression. Here's the reality, Vance. You're a quota higher. A box to check so the brass can say we're inclusive. But out there, he pointed a calloused finger toward the blast doors, out there you're a liability, and I don't carry dead weight. He turned to his men. Grab your gear. We're running the Crucible at 1400. Let's see if the math teacher can handle a kill house. The Crucible? Vance asked, her hands still resting on the cold metal of her rifle. Graves paused at the door, grinning. Combat sim. Live rounds, simunition, unpredictable AI. Highest score on the board is mine. 42 kills, 0 hostage casualties. If you get within half of that, I'll let you carry my radio. If not, you pack your bags. Vance looked at the digital scoreboard hanging on the far wall. Graves, 42. It blinked in aggressive red LEDs. Understood, Vance said softly. As the SEALs filed out, laughing and slapping each other on the back, Vance remained alone in the mess hall. She looked down at her rifle, her thumb tracing the safety selector. She didn't plan on getting 42 kills. That was inefficient. She planned on ending the war. But there was something they didn't know, something she hadn't told them, not yet, something about the way she saw the world that would change everything. And in a few hours they would see it too, whether they wanted to or not. Why does a room full of warriors fall silent when the lights go down? The simulation lab was a stark contrast to the gritty reality of Fob Dust Bowl. It was air-conditioned to a chill, humming with the aggressive white noise of server racks. In the center of the room stood 6 omnidirectional treadmills surrounded by haptic rigging frames. This was the Crucible, a multi-million-dollar virtual combat environment designed to induce PTSD without the physical wounds. Vance tightened the straps of her haptic vest. It was heavy, lined with actuators designed to simulate bullet impacts with bruising force. Across from her, Graves and his team were already suited up, their avatars loading into the local server. They looked like giants, even in the wireframe rendering of the lobby. Rules are simple, Vance. Graves' voice came through the headset, clear and devoid of static. Hostage is in the central compound. 2 minutes to extract before execution. We breach, we clear, we leave. You stay on the perimeter and call out movers. Don't shoot us. Understood, Vance replied. She calibrated her virtual scope, adjusting the sensitivity of her eye tracking. Drop in 3, 2, 1. The white room vanished. Vance blinked, and suddenly she was standing on a rooftop in a digital recreation of a Syrian border town. The resolution was terrifyingly high. Dust motes floated in the air. The sound of a distant call to prayer echoed off crumbling concrete walls. The heat wasn't real, but her brain, tricked by the visual fidelity, spiked her body temperature anyway. Below her in the alleyway, Graves and four operators, call signs Hammer, Anvil, Ghost, and Viper, were moving in a tight stack formation. They moved with the fluid, aggressive grace of apex predators. Breaching North Gate, flash out. A digital flashbang detonated, washing out Vance's thermal optics for a microsecond. The SEALs surged forward. Gunfire erupted immediately. The sharp crack of suppressed M4s. Contact front, left side room clear, moving. They were efficient, brutal. Vance watched from above, her breathing slow and controlled. She scanned windows, doorways, rooftops. Her scope swept in methodical arcs, covering angles the team couldn't see. "Watchtower, give me north rooftop," Graves commanded. Vance's crosshairs settled on a window. A shadow moved behind tattered curtains. "North rooftop clear. Second floor window northwest, possible hostile." "Confirm the shot," Graves said. Vance didn't fire, not yet. She waited. 2 seconds, 3. The shadow moved again, raising something. "Confirmed hostile, AK pattern rifle." Her finger squeezed. The simulated recoil kicked her shoulder. Through the scope, she saw the glass shatter, the figure crumple. "Target down." "Good shot, keep scanning." But Vance wasn't listening to the praise. She was already analyzing. The enemy AI in this simulation was adaptive, learning from player behavior. If she eliminated threats too early, the system would spawn reinforcements in unpredictable locations. If she waited, let the enemy commit to positions, she could create a kill zone. She was playing a game within a game, and the SEALs had no idea. "Hostage building, 60 seconds out," Graves reported. His breathing was elevated but controlled. The team moved like a single organism through the narrow streets. Vance saw it before they did. 3 heat signatures on a rooftop 2 blocks east. RPG team setting up an ambush. "Graves, stop," Vance said. "Negative, we're on the clock." "Commander, if you advance, you'll be in the kill zone of an RPG team in 14 seconds. "Where?" Graves demanded. "Rooftop 200 meters east. They're waiting for you to commit." There was a pause. Vance could almost hear the gears turning in his head. Trust the numbers or trust his instincts. "Hammer, Anvil, hold position. Watchtower, light them up." Vance's crosshairs drifted across the rooftops. She found them. 3 figures crouched behind a low wall, the distinctive silhouette of an RPG-7 resting on one man's shoulder. She fired once, twice, 3 times, each shot a heartbeat apart. 3 bodies dropped. "Threat neutralized, you're clear to advance." "Copy, moving." The team surged forward. Vance continued her silent vigil from above, her scope sweeping, her mind calculating. She wasn't just shooting targets. She was collapsing possibilities. Every enemy she eliminated was a future she prevented, a variable she removed from the equation. The SEALs breached the hostage building. Vance heard the staccato burst of gunfire, the shouted commands, the heavy breathing of men in combat. "Hostage secured. Exfil, exfil, exfil." But Vance had already seen the next problem. The AI had adapted, spawning a QRF, a quick reaction force at the extraction point. 6 vehicles, 24 hostiles. "Graves, exfil is compromised." "Say again." 6 vehicles inbound to your extraction. ETA 90 seconds. You need an alternate route." "There is no alternate route, Vance. We're locked in." Vance's mind raced. She pulled up the tactical overlay, scanning the map. There, a collapsed building, creating a choke point. If the team could funnel the enemy through that single avenue, she could control the engagement. "Reroute through the market square. Force them into the alley at grid 47. I'll have overwatch." "That's a kill box, Vance." "For them, not for you. Trust the math." Another pause, longer this time, then copy rerouting. The team moved. Vance repositioned, her digital body sprinting across rooftops with inhuman speed. She took a new firing position overlooking the narrow alley. Her scope settled. Her breathing slowed. And then they came. Vehicles screeched to a halt. Hostiles poured out, funneling into the alley in pursuit of the SEALs. They had no idea they were walking into a slaughterhouse. Vance fired again and again and again. She didn't think, she didn't hesitate, she simply solved the equation. Windage, elevation, lead, trigger, press. The world became rhythm, recoil, reset, acquire, fire. Bodies dropped like dominoes. What the hell is she doing? Someone shouted over the comms. She's saving our asses, that's what, Graves replied, his voice tight with something between awe and anger. Vance's kill count climbed, 20, 30, 40. She could feel the haptic vest pounding against her chest, simulating the recoil, the exertion. Sweat dripped into her eyes, she blinked it away. 50, 60, 70. The numbers stopped meaning anything. They were just data points in a cascade of solved problems. Extraction achieved, Graves finally said. We're out, simulation complete. The world froze, then dissolved. The rooftop vanished. The sounds of war faded. Vance blinked and she was back in the white room, her body aching, her heart pounding. She unstrapped the haptic vest. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline, from the high of perfect execution. Across the room, the SEALs were removing their gear in silence. Graves stood at the central terminal, staring at the scoreboard. Vance walked over, her legs unsteady. She looked up at the screen. Graves 28 kills, Hammer 15, Anvil 12, Ghost 9, Viper 11. And then at the bottom, glowing in red, Vance 126 kills. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the server racks. No one spoke, no one moved. Graves turned slowly, his face unreadable. How? He finally asked. Vance met his eyes. I stopped thinking like a soldier. I started thinking like the system. That's not possible, Hammer said, his voice hollow. The record was 42, you tripled it. I didn't try to win, Vance said. I tried to end the war. Graves stared at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he walked out. One by one, the others followed. They didn't congratulate her. They didn't shake her hand. They left her standing alone in the simulation room, victorious and isolated. Because what do you say to someone who doesn't fight like a human anymore? What do you say to someone who turned combat into calculus? And more importantly, what happens when that person has to prove herself not in a simulation, but in the dirt and blood of the real world? When does proving yourself become proving them wrong? The briefing room the next morning was cramped and smelled of instant coffee and old sweat. A single fan oscillated in the corner, doing nothing but redistributing hot air. Vance sat in the back row, her hands folded on the table in front of her. The SEALs filled the front rows, their backs to her, a wall of muscle and resentment. Colonel Holloway stood at the front, a tactical map projected on the screen behind him. His voice was clipped, efficient. Operation Silent Echo, priority target, encryption keys for enemy communications network. Intel suggests they're being held at a compound in the Anbar province. The problem is the compound sits in a valley with limited approach vectors. High ground belongs to the enemy. He clicked a remote. The map zoomed in, showing a spider web of ridgelines surrounding a cluster of buildings. The encryption keys are time-sensitive. We have a 48-hour window before they rotate protocols, and everything we've gathered becomes useless. This is a direct action raid. Fast, surgical, and we cannot afford to lose those keys. Graves raised his hand. Rules of engagement. Weapons free on confirmed hostiles, but the keys are the priority. If we lose them, the mission is a failure. Questions? Vance raised her hand. Holloway looked surprised. Sergeant Vance. The high ground. What's the enemy's strength on the ridgelines? Unknown. Drone footage shows movement, but we don't have exact numbers. Could be spotters, could be a sniper nest. That's why we're bringing Overwatch. You'll be inserted 12 hours before the team, establish a firing position, and provide coverage during the op. Graves turned in his seat, looking back at Vance. His expression was unreadable. "She's going in alone?" he asked. "That's the job description of a sniper commander," Holloway said. "You have a problem with that." Graves held Vance's gaze for a moment. Then he turned back around. "No problem, sir." But Vance could read the subtext in his silence. He didn't trust her. The simulation had proven she could shoot. It hadn't proven she could bleed. After the briefing, Vance was packing her gear in the armory when Graves appeared in the doorway. He stood there, arms crossed, watching her work. "You don't have to do this," he finally said. Vance didn't look up. She was inspecting her ammunition, checking each round for defects. "Do what?" "Prove yourself. You beat the sim. You made your point, but a real op is different. No respawns, no reset button." "I'm aware." "Are you?" Graves stepped closer. "Because yesterday you treated us like pieces on a chessboard. You moved us around, sacrificed our positions to win the game. That works in a simulation. But out there, we're not data points, Vance. We're men. We bleed. We die. And when the bullets start flying, I need to know you care about that." Vance finally looked up. Her gray eyes were steady, unflinching. "I care about bringing you home alive, Commander. That's why I did what I did. Every shot I took was to keep you breathing. Whether you believe that or not is your problem, not mine." Graves studied her for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "You're cold, Vance. Colder than anyone I've ever met. And I'm not sure if that makes you the best sniper I've ever seen or the most dangerous person to have on my team." He turned to leave, then paused. "Don't miss," he said, "because if you do, we're all dead." "I don't miss," Vance replied. But as Graves walked away, something inside her chest tightened. A small, almost imperceptible crack in the armor. She wasn't cold. She was terrified. Terrified of failure. Terrified of letting them down. Terrified that the math wouldn't be enough when the real world came crashing in. She finished packing her gear in silence. The rifle case felt heavier than usual. The helicopter insertion was at 200 hours. The night was moonless, the desert below a black void punctuated by the occasional spark of a distant fire. Vance sat alone in the back of the Black Hawk, her rifle case between her knees. The crew chief gave her a thumbs up. She returned it. 5 minutes, the pilot announced over the comms. Vance closed her eyes. She ran through the calculations in her mind. Wind speed, barometric pressure, temperature. Every variable had to be accounted for. Every factor had to be solved. But there was one variable she couldn't calculate: herself. The helicopter descended fast and low, the pilots using the terrain to mask their approach. The skids touched down for only 3 seconds. Vance jumped out, the rotor wash whipping her uniform. The helicopter lifted off immediately, disappearing into the night. And then she was alone. She was standing in a rocky valley, 700 meters from the target compound. Above her, the ridgeline loomed like a jagged spine against the stars. She had 12 hours to climb it, find a firing position, and wait. She started walking. The climb was brutal. The rocks were loose, shifting under her boots with every step. Her rifle case was strapped to her back, the weight pulling at her shoulders. Sweat soaked through her uniform despite the cold night air. She didn't stop. She didn't rest. She climbed. By the time she reached the ridge, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the valley in shades of copper and gold. Vance found a position behind a cluster of boulders, a natural hide that gave her a clear view of the compound below. She unpacked her rifle, assembling it with practiced efficiency. Then she waited. Waiting is the hardest part of being a sniper. Not the shot, not the stalk. The waiting. Hours of silence alone with your thoughts while the world moves on without you. Vance scanned the valley through her scope. The compound was quiet. A few guards walked the perimeter, bored and undisciplined. She marked their positions in her mind, memorizing their patrol patterns. The radio in her ear crackled to life. "Watchtower, this is Viper 1. Radio check." It was Graves. Vance keyed her mic. "Watchtower reads you, Lima Charlie. We're 12 mics out. What's the situation?" "Compound is static. 4 guards on patrol, rotating every 30 minutes. No signs of reinforcement. You should have a clear approach from the southwest." "Copy that. Stay sharp." "Always do." The line went silent again. Vance adjusted her position slightly, easing the pressure on her hips. She took a sip of water from her Camelback. Then she went back to waiting. But something was wrong. She could feel it. A prickling sensation at the base of her skull. An instinct she couldn't quantify. She scanned the ridgeline across from her, searching for movement. There. A glint of glass just for a moment, then gone. Vance's breath caught. There was another sniper out there, another wolf on the hunt, and she had just given away her position. What does fear taste like when you're 700 meters from salvation? The glint of glass vanished as quickly as it appeared, but Vance knew what she'd seen. Across the valley, hidden among the rocks and shadows, was another shooter, and whoever they were, they had just spotted her scope's reflection. Vance didn't move. Not a muscle, not a breath. She became stone. Her mind raced through the calculations. Distance, approximately 700 meters. Angle, elevated maybe 10 degrees. Wind, variable, gusting from the northeast. If the enemy sniper took the shot now, she had maybe 2 seconds to react. Maybe. But the shot didn't come. Why? Because they're smart, she realized. They're waiting just like you. The radio crackled. Graves' voice, urgent but controlled. "Watchtower, we're approaching the breach point. Confirm Overwatch is in position." Vance keyed her mic, her voice barely a whisper. "Overwatch is in position. Be advised, possible hostile sniper on the northeast ridge. I don't have a clean shot. Repeat, I do not have a clean shot." There was a pause, then, "Can you suppress?" "Negative. If I fire, I reveal my position. The wolf will relocate and you'll be exposed." "So what's the play?" Vance's mind worked through the problem. If she fired now, she'd force the enemy sniper to move, but she'd lose her tactical advantage. If she waited, the enemy might have the opportunity to take out Graves and his team during the breach. Either option was a gamble. But there was a third option, a dangerous one. "You need to draw him out," Vance said. "Force him to commit." "You want us to be bait?" Graves' voice was tight with controlled anger. "I need him to take a shot. Once he fires, I'll have his position. Then I can eliminate him. And if he doesn't miss?" "He won't shoot at you. You're too unpredictable. He'll shoot at me." Silence on the line. Vance could almost feel Graves wrestling with the decision. Trust the math or trust his instincts. "How confident are you in this plan?" he finally asked. 87%. "That's not 100, Vance." "Nothing in war is 100%, Commander, but it's the best option we have." Another pause, then, "Copy, we're breaching in 60 seconds, don't get shot." "I'll try my best." Vance adjusted her position slightly, angling her body to present a smaller target profile. She controlled her breathing. 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. Her heart rate slowed. The world narrowed to the view through her scope. Below, she could see Graves and his team stacking up at the compound's entrance. 4 shadows moving with predatory grace. The breach charge was set. The countdown began. 30 seconds. Vance scanned the far ridgeline. Nothing, just rocks and shadows. 20 seconds. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger guard, not on the trigger itself. Not yet. 10 seconds. And then she saw it. A subtle shift in the shadows. a dark shape rising slowly, deliberately. The enemy sniper was repositioning, preparing for the shot. 5 seconds. The breech charge detonated. The compound's door blew inward in a shower of splinters and dust. The seals poured inside. Gunfire erupted. And across the valley, the enemy sniper fired. The bullet screamed past Vance's head, missing by less than 6 inches. She felt the pressure wave, heard the supersonic crack, but she didn't flinch. She'd already acquired the target. Through her scope, she could see him clearly now. A man in desert camouflage, a Dragunov SVD rifle pressed against his shoulder. He was good, calm, already working the bolt, chambering another round. But Vance was faster. She exhaled half a breath. Her finger moved from the trigger guard to the trigger. The world reduced to a single point of focus: windage, elevation, lead. She fired. The recoil punched her shoulder. Through the scope, she watched the bullet's trajectory. It seemed to hang in the air forever, arcing across the valley, fighting gravity and wind. And then it found its mark. The enemy sniper's head snapped back. He crumpled behind the rocks, disappearing from view. "Target neutralized," Vance reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "You're clear to proceed." "Copy," Graves replied, his voice muffled by gunfire. "We're moving to the secondary objective." Vance kept scanning, searching for additional threats, but the valley remained quiet. The enemy sniper had been working alone. Minutes passed like hours. Vance's scope swept in methodical patterns, covering angles, watching for movement. Below, in the compound, the sounds of combat had faded to occasional bursts of gunfire. "Watchtower, this is Viper 1. We have the package, preparing for exfil." "Copy, what's your route?" "Southeast corridor, wheel." The transmission cut off, replaced by screaming. "Contact, multiple hostiles east side, we're taking fire." Vance's scope snapped to the compound. She could see them now. Graves and his team pinned down in a narrow courtyard, and pouring in from the east a wave of enemy fighters, at least 20, maybe more. "Viper 1, this is Watchtower. I have eyes on. Stand by for fire support." "We can't hold this position," Graves shouted. "We need to move." "Negative. If you break from cover, you'll be cut down in seconds. Hold position. I'll thin them out." Vance's mind shifted into the same state she'd experienced in the simulation. The world became geometry, angles and vectors, problems to be solved. She fired. The first hostile dropped. She worked the bolt, fired again. Another down. The enemy fighters scattered, searching for cover, but there was nowhere to hide from an angel of death perched on high ground. "How many rounds you got left?" Graves asked, his voice strained. Vance glanced at her magazine. 18. "There's at least 15 hostiles still moving." "Then I better not miss." She didn't. Each shot was precise, methodical. She wasn't shooting men. She was removing variables from an equation. One by one, the hostiles fell. But something was wrong. Even as she eliminated targets, more kept coming. The enemy was reinforcing faster than she could shoot. "Viper 1, you need to move. Now, head for the northwest exit. I'll suppress." "The package is worthless if you're dead. Move." Graves made the call. The team broke from cover, sprinting across the courtyard with Miller carrying the metal case containing the encryption keys. Vance provided covering fire, her shots forcing the enemy to duck, to hesitate, to give the SEALs those precious seconds they needed to escape. But then she saw him, a man on the rooftop with an RPG. The launcher was already on his shoulder, aimed directly at the fleeing team. Vance didn't have time to think. She fired. The shot was impossible. 720 meters, moving target, extreme angle. The bullet took 2 full seconds to reach its mark. And it hit not the man, the RPG warhead. The explosion was massive. The entire rooftop erupted in fire and smoke. the blast wave knocking nearby fighters off their feet. "What the hell was that?" Hammer shouted. "That was Watchtower saving your ass," Graves replied. "Keep moving." The team made it to the northwest exit. They were clear. They were alive. But Vance could see the blood. Even from 700 meters away, she could see that Graves was limping, and Miller's left leg was dragging. "Viper 1, report," she said. Graves took a round to the shoulder. "Miller's hit in the leg. We're mobile, but we need immediate exfil." "Exfil is 30 minutes out." "We don't have 30 minutes, Watchtower. We've got hostiles converging on our position." Vance scanned the compound. He was right. Enemy fighters were regrouping, preparing to pursue. "I'm moving to intercept," Vance said. She started packing her rifle. "Negative, Watchtower. You maintain overwatch." "If I maintain overwatch, you'll be dead in 10 minutes. If I move now, I can provide mobile support and help with the wounded." "Vance." "That's an order, Commander. Watchtower out." She cut the transmission. Then she started running. Down the ridge, her boots sliding on loose rocks, the rifle case bouncing against her back. She fell once, her knee slamming into stone. She got up, kept moving. She reached the valley floor in 8 minutes. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed. She didn't care. She could hear gunfire ahead. They were still fighting. She found them in a dried riverbed, using the high banks as cover. Graves was pale, his shoulder soaked in blood. Miller was unconscious, his leg tourniqueted. The other SEALs, Viper and Ghost, were returning fire, but they were running low on ammunition. Vance slid into the riverbed beside them, her rifle already assembled. Graves stared at her. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Saving you." She didn't wait for permission. She rose above the bank, her scope finding targets. She fired, worked the bolt, fired again. The enemy had expected a retreating force. They hadn't expected a sniper to suddenly appear in their midst, turning their pursuit into a death trap. "Exfil 2 minutes out," Ghost shouted, checking his watch. Vance provided covering fire as the team prepared to move. But when they tried to lift Miller, Graves collapsed. The blood loss had caught up with him. "I got him," Vance said. She slung her rifle and grabbed Graves, pulling his good arm over her shoulder. He was heavy, much heavier than her, but she didn't let go. "You can't carry both the rifle and me," Graves said weakly. "Watch me." She half carried, half dragged him toward the extraction point, her legs burning, her back screaming. Behind them, Viper and Ghost carried Miller, providing rear guard. The helicopter appeared over the ridgeline, its rotors beating the air like a war drum. It descended fast, the crew chief already reaching out to pull them aboard. They loaded Miller first, then Graves. Vance was the last one in, collapsing onto the metal floor as the helicopter lifted off. Bullets pinged off the hull, but they were already climbing, already escaping. Vance looked at Graves. He was conscious, his eyes fixed on her. There was something in his expression she couldn't read: gratitude, resentment, respect. He opened his mouth to speak. But before he could say anything, one of the other SEALs, Miller, reached out his hand toward her, his fingers stretched in what looked like an offer of thanks, of acknowledgement. Graves saw it. With a surge of effort that must have been agonizing, Graves reached out his uninjured arm and shoved Miller's hand down. It was a violent, angry motion. He shook his head, his eyes blazing. "No." Miller looked confused, then ashamed. He pulled his hand back, looking at the floor. The message was clear. To thank Vance was to betray the commander. To thank the calculator was to insult the men who had bled. Vance tightened her grip on her rifle. She understood. She had saved them, and they would hate her for it. When does winning feel like losing? The helicopter banked hard, the stomach-dropping sensation of a combat landing. Through the open door, Vance could see the sprawling lights of Forward Operating Base Dust Bowl. Ambulances waited on the landing pad, their back doors open like hungry mouths. The wheels hit the tarmac with a heavy thud. Medical personnel in blue scrubs and body armor swarmed the bird before the rotors even stopped. They bypassed Vance completely, surrounding Graves and Miller like white blood cells attacking an infection. Male 34, GSW to the shoulder, hemorrhage controlled. Male 28, GSW to the leg. They lifted the litters, running toward the surgical tent. The remaining SEALs, Viper and Ghost, jumped out after them, hands on the stretchers, a tight-knit organism of loyalty. In 30 seconds, the helicopter was empty. Vance remained seated. The crew chief began unstrapping his harness. "You okay, Sergeant?" he shouted over the dying rotors. "You hit." Vance looked at her uniform. There was blood on her sleeve. It wasn't hers. It was Graves. She had carried him. She had saved him. And he would hate her for it for the rest of his life. "I'm clear," she said. She stood, her joints popping. She slung the Pelican case over her shoulder. It felt heavier now than it had on the mountain. She walked down the ramp, the rotor wash whipping her hair. The ambulance lights were fading into the distance. The dust was settling. She stood on the tarmac alone. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the base. She didn't go to the hospital. There was no place for her there. That was for the team. That was for the heroes. She turned and walked toward the armory. She had a rifle to clean. She had a logbook to update. Variables resolved, she told herself. Mission complete. But as she walked through the gathering dark, the silence of the base felt louder than the gunfire. She was a ghost again, and this time she wasn't sure if she wanted to be. The armory was empty, just metal racks of weapons and the smell of gun oil. Vance sat at a workbench and began disassembling her rifle. The familiar ritual was soothing. Bolt carrier group, firing pin, barrel, each piece removed, inspected, cleaned, reassembled. She worked in silence. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the mission. The shot that killed the enemy sniper. The impossible shot that detonated the RPG. The moment Graves shoved Miller's hand away. She had done everything right. The math had been perfect, the execution flawless. So why did it feel like failure? Because numbers don't bleed, she thought. Numbers don't feel betrayed. She finished cleaning the rifle and closed the case. She sat there for a moment, staring at the metal surface. Then she stood and left. The base was quiet now. Most personnel were in the mess hall or the recreation tent. Vance walked alone through the darkened pathways, past sandbagged bunkers and parked vehicles. She found herself standing outside the medical tent. Through the translucent plastic walls, she could see shadows moving. Doctors, nurses, the wounded. She could go in, she could check on them, she could try to explain. But what would she say? "I used you as bait because the math said it was the best option. I let you break cover because I calculated you had a 63% chance of survival." They wouldn't understand. They couldn't, because to them she wasn't a person, she was a machine, cold, calculating, inhuman. Maybe they were right. She turned away from the tent and kept walking. She ended up at the perimeter fence, staring out into the desert night. The stars were brilliant here, away from city lights. Infinite points of light in an infinite void. "Sergeant Vance." She turned. Colonel Holloway was standing behind her, hands in his pockets. "Sir," she said, straightening. At ease, Holloway stepped up beside her, looking out at the desert. Hell of a mission. "Yes, sir." "Graves is stable. He'll be stateside in 48 hours. Miller, too. They're both going to make it because of you." Vance said nothing. Holloway glanced at her. "You did good work out there, Vance. Exceptional work. The kind of work that gets people medals." "I was just doing my job, sir." "Were you?" Holloway turned to face her fully. "Because I read the after-action reports. I watched the drone footage. You made some very unconventional calls out there, using the team as bait, delaying your shots. Some might call it reckless." It was the optimal solution, sir. Optimal, Holloway repeated the word. Vance, do you know why most snipers wash out? It's not the shooting. Any good marksman can be taught to hit a target. It's the isolation, the waiting, the fact that you're alone out there with your thoughts for hours, sometimes days. It breaks people, makes them question everything. I don't break, sir. No, Holloway said softly. You don't, and that's what worries me. He pulled a folder from his jacket. Commander Graves filed a complaint. He's claiming you deliberately withheld fire, used his team as live bait to draw out enemy positions. He's citing Article 114, reckless endangerment. Vance's jaw tightened. I did what was necessary to. I know, Holloway held up a hand. The ballistic analysis backs you up. The timing proves it. If you'd fired a second sooner, the enemy sniper would have ducked. If you'd fired a second later, Graves would be dead. You threaded a needle through a hurricane, Vance. You did everything right. Then why does it sound like there's a but coming, sir? Holloway sighed. Because wars are fought by men, not machines, and men need to believe their guardian angels actually care about them. Do you understand what I'm saying? You're saying I should have been warmer. I'm saying that being right isn't always enough. Graves will never trust you again. Neither will his team. And without trust, you can't operate with them. Vance felt something cold settle in her chest. I see. Holloway opened the folder. I'm clearing you of the charges. The review board agrees that your actions were tactically sound and necessary for mission success. But he slid a second paper across. You're being transferred, effective immediately. Vance took the paper. Where to, sir? JSOC has a new deep recon unit standing up in Africa. Solo operators, long-range surveillance, no teams, no brotherhood, just you and the rifle. He looked at her with something that might have been pity or respect. She couldn't tell the difference anymore. It seems like a better fit. Understood, sir. She saluted. Holloway returned it, but his hand lingered in the air. Vance, he said as she turned to leave, do you ever wish you were warmer? Vance paused. She thought about the simulation room. She thought about the heat of the valley. She thought about the moment the trigger broke and lives changed forever. Warmth causes mirage, Colonel, she said. I prefer clarity. She walked away, leaving him standing alone by the fence. What do you take with you when you leave a place that never wanted you? An hour later, Vance stood in the empty barracks. Her locker was open. Her gear was packed. The Pelican case sat heavy in her hand, a familiar weight that somehow felt different now. Lighter, or maybe heavier, she couldn't tell anymore. She walked through the base one last time. Past the motor pool where mechanics worked under floodlights. Past the communications tent where radio operators monitored frequencies. Past the rec tent where off-duty soldiers played cards and watched pirated movies on a laptop screen. She passed the medical tent. The lights were still on. Through the translucent walls she could see Graves' silhouette sitting up in bed arguing with a nurse. Still fighting, still alive. She didn't go in. There was nothing to say. He was alive because of her. He hated her because of her. That was a fair trade. She walked past the mess hall. It was empty between shifts, the tables bare, the air conditioning rattling in the corner. She stopped in front of the digital scoreboard on the wall. The simulation records. Graves, 42 kills. And below it, the entry from her first day. The anomaly, the ghost in the machine. Vance, 126 kills. Someone had tried to erase it. There were smudge marks on the plastic screen, as if someone had angrily rubbed at the numbers with a thumb. But the LEDs burned bright and red, unchangeable. Vance looked at the score for a moment. It wasn't boasting. It was just a fact, a data point in a world of chaos. She adjusted her grip on the rifle case. She turned her back on the board, on the base, on the team that would never understand her. Outside, a transport plane was waiting on the runway, engines idling. Its cargo ramp was down. revealing a dark interior filled with supply crates and shadows. No ceremony, no fanfare, just another piece of equipment being moved from one location to another. Vance walked across the tarmac. The night air was cool now, the desert shedding its heat like a snake shedding skin. Above, the stars watched in silence. She reached the ramp and paused. For just a moment she looked back at the base. Lights glowed in windows. People moved between buildings. Life continued, indifferent to her departure. Somewhere in that maze of tents and concrete, men were recovering from wounds she had prevented from being fatal. Somewhere, they were telling stories about the mission, editing her out of the narrative, making themselves the heroes of their own survival. And maybe that was fine. Maybe that was how it was supposed to be. She climbed the ramp. The interior of the plane was cold and smelled of hydraulic fluid and canvas. She found a seat among the cargo straps and buckled in. The rifle case rested between her boots. The crew chief appeared, a young airman with tired eyes. "You good, Sergeant?" "I'm good. We'll be wheels up in 5. It's a long flight. You should try to sleep." "I don't sleep much." The airman nodded like he understood, but he didn't. How could he? He walked away, and Vance was alone again. The engine spooled up, the vibration traveling through the metal floor. The plane began to taxi. Vance looked out the small porthole window, watching the lights of Fob Dust Bowl recede into the darkness. She thought about Graves, about the way he'd looked at her in the helicopter with something between gratitude and hatred. She thought about Miller, reaching out his hand only to be pushed away. She thought about the scoreboard, the numbers glowing in defiant red. She thought about Colonel Holloway's question, "Do you ever wish you were warmer?" The answer was complicated. Yes, sometimes. In the quiet moments when the mission was done and the adrenaline faded and she was left alone with the weight of her choices. In those moments she wished she could feel what they felt. The camaraderie, the brotherhood, the warmth of belonging. But warmth was a luxury she couldn't afford. Warmth clouded judgment. Warmth made you hesitate. And in her line of work, hesitation meant death. Not just for her, but for the people depending on her. So she stayed cold, she stayed clear, she stayed alone. The plane lifted off, the wheels leaving the earth with a mechanical shudder. Vance felt the familiar sensation of ascent, of leaving one world and entering another. Below, the base became a cluster of lights, then a smudge, then nothing. She closed her eyes. She didn't sleep, but she drifted. Somewhere between consciousness and rest, her mind played through scenarios. New variables, new equations, a new war waiting somewhere over the horizon. When she opened her eyes hours later, the sun was rising. Through the porthole she could see nothing but clouds and sky, infinite, empty, beautiful in its desolation. Staff Sergeant Ara Vance was headed to Africa, to a new unit, a new mission, a new ridge to climb and a new silence to inhabit. She didn't know what waited for her there, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would be ready. She would calculate every variable. She would solve every problem. She would do whatever it took to bring people home alive. Even if they hated her for it. Even if they never understood. Because that's what ghosts do. They watch from the shadows. They protect from afar. They save lives without seeking credit. And when it's over, when the mission is complete and the bullets stop flying, they disappear. Back into the darkness. Back into the mathematics of war. Back into the cold, clear silence where heroes are made from calculations and redemption is measured in lives saved rather than words spoken. Vance reached down and touched the rifle case. The metal was cool under her fingers, solid, reliable. It didn't judge her, it didn't resent her, it just worked, just like she did. The plane banked, adjusting course. Somewhere ahead, a new war waited. New teams who would doubt her, new commanders who would test her, new mountains to climb and new enemies to solve. She would face them all the same way she always had, with precision, with clarity, with the cold, unshakable certainty that mathematics never lies. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Maybe that had to be enough. Because in the end, dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't demand recognition. It doesn't seek warmth or praise or understanding. It simply acts. And then it moves on.